Good morning. Today's Daf Yomi is Chagigah Daf Ches, Chagigah 8. We're going to start on the bottom of 7b. Now, we had said in the Mishnah that on the first day of Pesach, Beis Shammai says, if you're bringing the Chagigah, which is an obligatory offering, it has to come from unconsecrated funds, which are called chulin, meaning free money, that not that it's being given to you for free, but money that's not assigned or attached anywhere. However, if Beis Hillel says that it has to come, it can come even min ha'meiser, even from money that was assigned to be used for sacred purposes for meiser sheni. So the Gemara now analyzes these statements. So the Gemara says, Ma'ishna Chagigos Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach. We're three lines on the bottom of 7b. Why does it specify the Chagigah of the first day of Pesach? We have to bring this Chagigah offering on all the holidays. Why does it say specifically on the first day of Pesach the money has to come from the unconsecrated funds, from the unassigned money? So Amar Rav Ashi comes along and teaches us the Chiddush, the new teaching. Kamashmon is teaching us this Chiddush that Chagigah Chamisha Sar in, Chagigah Sarba Sar Lo. That the Chagigah of the 15th day has to come from unassigned funds, from chulin, but the Chagigah of the 14th day, Chagigah of the Arba Asar, that can even come from consecrated money. Meaning to say the Chagigah of the 14th day is not obligatory. That's just an offering that we eat if, for example, that we're concerned that people are not going to be completely satisfied from the Paschal lamb, because there's a mitzvah that the Paschal lamb has to be in ala sofa with a full appetite, because otherwise we're concerned that you might come. Someone explained that the reason for this commandment is otherwise you might come to break a bone, which is a biblical commandment. You're not allowed to break the bone of the Paschal lamb. So because that's the case, we say that the Chagigah of the 14th is not really obligatory. Therefore, it could come even from the consecrated money of the Meiser Sheni. But anyway, we see from here, says the Gemara on the top of 8a, Alma Kasavar, Chagigah Sarba Sar Lav Deoraisa. We see from here that the Chagigah of the 14th day is not biblical, because if it was a biblical requirement to bring the Chagigah on the 14th day of Nisan, then you would have had to bring it also from the unconsecrated money. So now our Gemara is going to analyze the second part of that statement. The Beis Hillel says that the Chagigah can even come from the Meiser, from the consecrated funds. So Amar Mar, so we learned Beis Hillel Omer min ha'meiser. Now you could even pay the Chagigah from the consecrated funds, from the money that was reserved to be used for sacred purposes, for meiser sheni. So ask the Gemara, why? Why can you use it? Davar shebachova, it's an obligatory offering. Called davar shebachova einu ba'al min ha'chulin. And we know that since the Chagigah is a obligatory offering, it can only come from the unconsecrated funds. Why are you able to use your money that was attached to be used for sacred purpose? It's like a bond that has to be used for a sacred purpose. How can you use this for the chulin? So the Gemara explains, Amar Ula betofel. So we're talking about the case where the money is not clearly the money is not clearly assigned to the Meiser Sheni. It's not entirely Meiser Sheni money or consecrated money. It's also, you're supplementing it with unconsecrated funds. So you're mingling the money. So since you're commingling the money, therefore you can use it. How are we doing this? What is this word kofel? The word tofel means to connect. So what you're doing is you're connecting it. That's what Rashi says. Mechaber, you're connecting. So how do you do it? Chizkiah, so there's a dispute between the Talmudic sages. How exactly do we do this? Chizkiah says, Toflin behema lebehema, ve'in toflin mos lemos. Chizkiah says what you do is you combine behema lebehema. Chizkiah says you combine, what you'll do is you'll take, let's say you want to bring 4 Chagigahs. You have a lot of people coming there. So to your household to eat with you. So Chizkiah says what you do is you take the first animal and you buy that first animal completely with unconsecrated money. And then the second, and then you fulfill your obligation. Then 2, 3, and 4 of the Chagigah, which you're going to be giving out to all the people in your household, you'll buy that from the unconsecrated, from the consecrated funds. That's what Chizkiah says. Chizkiah says you don't mingle all the money together, because if you mingle all the money together, then you're not going to be certain that at least the first bite is coming from the unconsecrated funds. So he says you have to mingle. You can mingle the animals because they're not really mingled. Each animal is going to be distinct, and the first animal will be unconsecrated funds, but you can't mingle the money. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says the opposite. Rabbi Yochanan says what you do is you. Rabbi Yochanan says just the opposite. Rabbi Yochanan says tofa mos vein tofa meimel behema. Rabbi Yochanan says you can mingle the money with the other money, but you can't mingle the animals together, because if you're mingling the animals, then the animal number 2, 3, etc., are not going to come from unconsecrated funds. So it's a problem. If you mingle the money, there's at least some unconsecrated money in each portion of the Chagigah that you eat. So that's the logic there. So the Gemara says, yes.
Just a quick question. How does something become consecrated?
That's an excellent question. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about the Meiser Sheni money, which is called the secondary tithe. That you have to take a tithe in certain years. You have to take a tithe, meaning you have to say you have to take the food that you grow, the produce, and bring it to Jerusalem and eat there. But if it's too much to bring, you could transfer it to money and then buy things to eat with in Jerusalem. So that's called the sacred money, the Meiser Sheni, the consecrated money. And so therefore you can't use that money to purchase things that you anyways otherwise have an obligation to purchase, like, for example, the Chagigah. So that's what we're talking about, this type of consecrated money. Very good question. So the Talmud says, Tanya Kavase de Chizkiah and Tanya Kavase de Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa that supports the position of Chizkiah and a brisa that supports the position of Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa that supports the position of Chizkiah, who says that you can mingle the animals together, but you cannot mingle the money. And we have a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan, that says you can mingle the money, but not the animals. So how does this work? Tanya Kavase de Rabbi Yochanan. Where it says, first we'll start with the brisa supporting Rabbi Yochanan, who says you can mingle the money, but not the animals, because it says by the holiday of Shavuos, it says in the verse, misas nidvas yadcha, that you should make the holiday of Shavuos misas nidvas yadcha. And the word misas means chulin. From unconsecrated money, you shall give your offering. And so says the brisa, adam mevi chovaso menachulin. This teaches us you have to bring your offerings from unconsecrated funds. Uminayin shemratzo ariv ma'ariv. And how do you know that if you want to mix the funds together, you can. Like Hashem will bless you. So that means to say that you can pay the kasher yivarecha Hashem al kecha. Rashi says that means from all your money you can do it. So even from the consecrated funds. But the concept of mixing together, that's a concept that applies to money and not animals, because animals are always distinct. But the money can really be mixed together in one. So this, therefore, is a support for Rabbi Yochanan that if you want to commingle the assets, you can do with respect to money, but not with respect to an animal. Whereas comes along, we have a brisa that also supports Chizkiah. Tanya Kavasi de Chizkiah. We have a brisa that supports Chizkiah because it says, "Misas melamech adam mevi chovaso menachulin." The word misas that you give of your offering. This teaches us that a person can bring an obligation from their chulin, the person gives their offering from the unconsecrated funds. Beis Shammai says as follows: Yom Rishon min hachulin. The first day the offering comes from unconsecrated funds, and then you fulfill the obligation. So then become eloch. So if you want to bring offerings on the other days, min hamaiser, like that'll be the Shalmei Simcha, that can come from the consecrated funds. Whereas Beis Hillel says just the achila rishona minachun, the first bite has to come from the unconsecrated funds. From that point on, from the consecrated funds. But we see that Beis Hillel says the first bite has to be entirely from the unconsecrated funds, and this supports Chizkiah's position, because if it's all the money's mixed together, then you can never argue that the first bite is completely from unconsecrated funds, because it's always a mixture. So this source supports Chizkiah. And then the Talmud continues and says, "Ushar kol yemos Pesach, all the other days of the festival, Adam yotzei yudei chavaso b'meiser behema." A person can fulfill their obligation with the 10th animal, with the meiser behema. What's the 10th animal? This is the mitzvah of meiser behema, that the farmer is supposed to take all of his animals and puts them through an opening in the pen, and he counts the first one is for me, second one's for me, third one's for me, etc. Then when he comes to 10, he says the 10th is for God, thereby acknowledging that the first 9 animals, God has given him all these blessings, and the 10th one is for God, and he marks that with a red paint, and then he takes that animal and he eats it with himself and his friends in Jerusalem. So that the Meiser Behema animal can only be used after the first day of Pesach. Well, why not? Can't you use it on the first day of Yom Tif? The Meiser Behema B'Yom Tov my time ago. Why can't you do it on the first day of the festival? Because we're concerned that you might come to tithe on Yom Tif, and you're not allowed to tithe on Yom Tif. Why can't you tithe on Yom Tif? The Gemara explains, because as part of the tithing process, you have to paint the animal red mark, and you're not allowed to do that on Yom Tif. So that's why. So the Gemara asks the question, how do we know that this word misas means that you take it from unconsecrated funds? How do we know that the word misat in Hebrew? How do we know that means unconsecrated? So the Gemara explains, well, we're gonna learn it out from story coming up from the holiday of Purim, the book of Esther. It says, King Achashverosh put a tax on the land. And for the fact that he put a tax on the land, this teaches us this concept that mas, whereas tax, you can't pay from assigned money. Your taxes have to come from unassigned money, from unconsecrated money. So this teaches us that the misas is from unconsecrated funds. Then the Mishnah had said that the Jewish people, the Israelites, everybody, they fulfill their obligation for the Shalmei Simcha. This is the third type of offering. There's 3 offerings that you have to bring on the holiday. The pilgrimage offering, that's entirely consumed on the altar. The Chagigah, which is obligatory, that's the first day. And if you miss it on the first day, you can bring it onward. And then the third type is the Shalmei Simcha. That if you still want more meat to eat, you can bring that offering throughout the holiday. So that's supplemental, but that's optional. So that you could use a vow if you had previously vowed to give a sheep or a cow or as a offering, a voluntary offering to the temple, you could use that to fulfill your obligation for the Shalmei Simcha. What's the source for this idea? Tana Ramban, the rabbis taught, it says, "V'samachta b'chagecha," you shall rejoice on your holiday. The Rabos kol minei smachos u'simcha means to tell us you can use all of these animals, these voluntary vows that you made, to fulfill the mitzvah of rejoicing on the holiday. Mikan amru chachamim, from this verse, from the fact that it says v'samachta b'chagecha, the rabbis learn from here, Yisrael yotzi nechavas, and a Jew can fulfill his obligation of the Shalmei Simcha, rejoicing on the holiday, b'nedar menedavas, with these voluntary offerings, b'maiser behema, with this 10th animal, v'kohanim, and a Kohen has other meat that are sometimes that's sacred meat, but they're given to him as a gift. As for example, he gets to eat the meat of the sin offering and the guilt offerings. That's the chatas and the asham. The bechor, a firstborn animal, goes to the Kohen and goes as an offering on the altar, and the Kohen gets to eat part of it. That's the bechor. Because of a shok, and then the breast and the thigh, which is if a Jew brings a shlamim, he gives the Kohen the breast and the thigh to eat. I might think that you could fulfill the mitzvah of the Shalmei Simcha, this korban of rejoicing, even with birds or with grain offerings. You shall rejoice on your holiday. And rejoicing means, as the Gemara says on the top of 8b, you have to use an animal which the korban Chagigah would also be able to be brought from. And and this excludes the birds and the grains, which the rejoicing, which the animal doesn't come from. The Chagigah offering doesn't come from. Rav Ash, even though this was a brisa, and that's an early source called the Tanaitic source, Rav Ashi, who's the last generation of the Amoraim, and typically an Amora cannot argue with a Tana, Rav Ashi gives his own reasoning for how you can use all of these animals from your voluntary offerings to fulfill the mitzvah of Shalmei Simcha. Rav Ashi says we learn it out from the fact that it says not from the word bichagecha, but from the word it says you shall rejoice, because he says Rav Ashi says he says it's to exclude chicken or fowl, bird, and grain, because you only get the rejoicing from the meat. Obviously, and Rashi said that earlier, you only get really full and happy from meat. now obviously if somebody is repulsed by meat, then you don't fulfill the mitzvah of rejoicing on the holiday by eating meat. But if somebody today we are not bringing the korban, but there's still a concept of rejoicing. But if a person says, I really love meat, then that person on the holiday would have to try to eat meat. But if you're repulsed by meat, then certainly you shouldn't eat meat, because that's not giving you joy. That's giving you, then you're repulsed. So since Rav Ashi learns it out from the word v'samachta, what does he do with the word v'chagecha, that you shall rejoice on your holiday? What does he learn out from that word? What does Rav Ashi do with the word v'chagecha? So the Gemara cites here a Gemara source that we already had in Moed Katan on 8b. We had this around almost a month ago exactly. What does he state? He states, Rav Daniel Bar Katina. He uses this word to apply like Rav Daniel Bar Katina taught, who said, Rav Daniel Bar Katina, how do we know you're not allowed to get married on Chol Moed? So the reason why you're not allowed to get married on the intermediary days of the holiday is because it says v'samachta b'chagecha. You have to rejoice with your festival. Now with your wife. If you're going to get married on the holiday, then your new bride is going to necessarily require all your attention. We want your attention to be focused on the festival. And so therefore we say don't get married on the intermediary days of the festival. The Talmud says, the next Mishnah states, Misha Yoishlo Ocha Merubin. If a person has a lot of people who are there in his party to eat the Chagigah, but he doesn't have a lot of money, so then what should he do? Maybe shlamim merubim v'oos muata. So under those circumstances, he should bring a korban, a lot of shlamim. He should bring a lot of the animals that could be eaten, but he should divide up his resources and give less of the olos. But because the olos are entirely burnt on the altar and nobody gets to eat from them, he has to feed his whole household. But let's say he has nechasim merubin v'ocham muatim. Once he has a lot of money for very few people eating, then maybe olos merubos. Then he brings a lot of the animals that are burnt on the altar, but shlamim muatin. But he brings very few of the animals that you get to eat from. And the reason is because it's not appropriate to bring a sacrifice that's supposed to be eaten, and you don't have the people to eat it, because then what's going to happen is the food is going to expire. It's called nosar, expired meat. You have a 2 days only to eat it, and then if it's not going to be eaten, then you're going to be bringing this meat to a state where it's going to be nosar and it's going to be burnt without it reaching its holy status. And so therefore, for this reason, you should limit the amount of chagigos that you offer if you're not convinced that you have people to eat them. And let's say let's say you have not a lot of money and you have not a lot of people to eat it, then under those circumstances, then you bring the minimum amount, which is 1 meah, according to Beis Hillel, for the re'iyah, and 2 meah for the chagigah. You bring the minimum amount. But let's say you have a lot of money and a lot of people to feed. About this, the verse states, then you have to give according to what you could. The more you give the blessing, it's a blessing from God to give your offer. So the Gemara asks the question. on 8b. Shlamim merubim. We said that if you have very little money, but you have a lot of people to eat it, you bring under those circumstances a lot of the korban shlamim and very little olah. But we just said you have no money. So how are you bringing the shlamim? Shlamim merubim mehechi ma'isi. How are you bringing it? You have very little money. So the Gemara says, "Halesla, you have no money." So Amar Rav Chisda says, "Tofel maybe paragadol." This brings us back to what we said on the previous page. He says basically you supplement, you combine the money, you can combine the consecrated money, the unconsecrated money with consecrated funds, and use it to buy a big bowl, and then you feed everybody. So that's how you're able to stretch your money out, by using the consecrated funds. This is consistent with the position of Rabbi Yochanan, who says you can commingle the money to buy your offering. Amalei Rav Sheshes responds, Hari Amru Tofum Behema Behema. He says you supplement an animal to another animal, which seems to sound like Chizkiah, but the Gemara says who says that you bring supplemental animals, more than one animal, and that the first one has to be from unconsecrated, and the others from consecrated. But the Gemara is not ready to accept it. That's what Rav Sheshes is saying. Because the Gemara says, "My Kamarle." What's Rav Sheshes saying? If what Rav Sheshes is saying, Hare Amru Tofum Behema Behema Mos. If he's saying, we said like Chagigah that you could combine the animals but not the money, then he should have just said that. Ain't Tofum Mos. You can't combine the money with the other money. So it can't be that that's what he's saying. So this must be what Rav Sheshes was saying. He's saying that you can even, in addition to consecrating, to commingling the money, the consecrated and the unconsecrated, you could also, another option would be to like Chagigah, to combine the animals together. And Mar says, wait, so Rav Sheshes is saying like both positions, that you could commingle the money and also commingle the animals. Well, then he's not like either one. He's not like Chagigah or Rabbi Yochanan, because they both said mutually exclusive positions, that you could do one or the other. So this is a third approach, that you could do both. So the Gemara says, command the local Chagigah, the local Rabbi Yochanan. And if you want to say, if you want to say, yeah, the Amorai and Chagigah and Rabbi Yochanan, they're arguing. But the earlier source that we cited as the support for Chagigah was not necessarily saying that you couldn't commingle the money. It was just saying you could also commingle the animals. And that's what Rav Sheshes is relying upon. But that source states that the first bite has to come entirely from the unconsecrated funds. Gemara says, yeah, that's the way we read it initially. But that's actually not what it means. What does it mean when it says Achil Rishona? It means shiur, the first eating. It means shiur demei achil rishona menachon. It means that in your first bite, it must have enough money. You must have put enough money into the mixture of the funds that you could have eaten that first bite from unconsecrated funds. That's all it's saying. So now we have established that a little bit of a different topic, although it's connected, that you have to buy the first day. You have to bring the Chagigah the first day. If for some reason you didn't bring this Chagigah offering on the first day, you could bring it for the whole holiday. So, however, let's say you brought it to Chagigah on the first day, and then you want to bring the Chagigah on the second day, in addition, another additional offering, well, then we have a concern that you're in violation of the prohibition of the Torah of Baal Tosif. You're not allowed to add on commandments from the Torah. So the Talmud now says, Amar Ula, Amar Reish Lakish, we're going to have a dispute between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish says, Hifresh Eser Behemos L'Chagigaso. Let's say a person separated 10 animals as his Chagigah. He separated 10 animals to bring as his Chagigah. He separated 10 animals. And then what did he do after he separated 10 animals? Hikriv Chamesh B'Yom Tov Rishon. And you can bring the 5 on the first day. And then Chozer Makriv Chamesh B'Yom Tov Sheni. He can bring 5 on the second day. And he doesn't have to be concerned that he's in violation of this prohibition of do not add on to the sacrifices. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, Kivan Shapasak Shuveim Makriv. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, once you stop on the first day, you can't bring any on the second day. Then we're going to be concerned about Baal Tosif, adding on. He says you have to bring whatever you brought on the first day is okay. After that, you're done. So Amar Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba says, actually, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are not actually arguing with each other. Lo Puigi. Kam b'stam, kam b'mefarish. One is where it's stam, one is where it's mefarish. What does that mean? Stam means where basically the indication is not that it's all one part of intended to bring on day one. And people might think that you're also intending to bring it on day 2. So then it's going to be a problem because people will be concerned that you're in violation of Baal Tosif, or you may be yourself being or you yourself might have thought that you're intending to use it for day 2, which is a problem of Baal Tosif, of adding on. But Mefarish, but where you're explicit that this is for day 1, and then for some reason you ended up bringing it on day 2, then it's not Baal Tosif, because then you really intended to bring it on day 1. And then Gemara is going to explain, what does this mean, Stam and Mefarish? Hi, Stam, Hechidami. What is a Stam? If you want to say, look, I have these 10 animals to offer, but there's just not enough time in the day. Or And therefore, then that wouldn't be a concern at all, because the reason why you didn't bring them is because you just didn't have enough time. So it's clearly not that you think you have to bring the offerings on both days. If you want to say, look, I just don't have people to eat all these, the people didn't show up to eat my 10 animals, nobody showed up to my party, well then, it's obviously the case, it's obviously the case that the reason why you didn't offer it is because there isn't food to offer it. So rather, there's enough time to sacrifice them, and there's enough people to eat them, and for some reason you still didn't bring it. So therefore, we would say under those circumstances, from the fact that you didn't bring it on day one, we see that you're intending to bring it on day two, and then it will be a problem because of Baal Tosif. And indeed, the Gemara says, this is logical. The Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came from the land of Israel to Babylon, he says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, it's logical to say that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are not arguing, that they agree that it depends what's the intent of your actions. If you intended to bring them all in one day, just didn't do it for whatever reason, then we're going to say it's fine. But if you intended to bring it over 2 days, then it's a problem. But it looks like you're adding on to the commandment of bringing an offering, which is supposed to be on day one. And the reason why we prove that this is indeed that Rabbi Yochanan is not really arguing with Reish Lakish is because when Ravin came, he brought a teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, where Rabbi Yochanan said, now our initial teaching of Rabbi Yochanan was said that once you bring 5 offerings, you can't bring any more the next day if you separated 10 animals, but because that's Baal Tosif. But according to this source, Rabbi Yochanan said, Hifresh Aser Behemos Chagigaso, if you separated 10 animals, Hikriv Chamesh B'Yom Tov Rishon, Chozer Makriv Chamesh B'Yom Tov Sheni. That if you separated 5, if you separate 10 animals and you brought 5 on the first day, you can go back and bring 5 on the second day. But according to the first source of Rabbi Yochanan, he said that you couldn't do that. So Kashi Nayadadi, so these two sources are contradicting each other. We see from here, it's obvious, it must be Kamas Tam Kamam first. It depends what the intent of your actions was. If you intended to bring them all on day one, then you can continue to bring it on day 2. But if you intended to bring them over 2 days, then you can't. And in Marnami Amar Hashem Barabba Rabbi Yochanan, we have another source that states this also from Rabbi Yochanan. Oshanu El Shelo Gamar. When do we say this? When do we say that you're not allowed to bring the leftover animals the next day? Only where you did not complete it. Avol Gamar Chozer Makriv. But where you completed it, you go back and bring it. What does this mean? Gamar, my Gamar, Ilamer Gamar Karbanot. So if you say you completed your offerings, well, my Makriv, what are you bringing? There's no animal left. Must be like we said, Shel Gamar Ayom, that the day didn't end, that you had plenty of time and you still didn't bring it. Avol Gamar Ayom, but you just ran out of time to bring them that day. Chozer Makriv. You can go back and bring them the next day. So that's the Gemara. I'll be happy to take any questions.